Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Kitabul Birr wa Sila wal Adaab, and we are moving on to the chapter of the evils of lying and the virtue of truth. From Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, the Prophet said, "Alaykum bis-sidq, fa-inna as-sidq yahdi ila al-birr, wa inna al-birra yahdi ila al-jannah." Upon you is to be truthful, because truthful leads to righteousness, and righteousness leads to Jannah. وَمَا يَزَالُ الرَّجُلُ يَصْدُقُ وَيَتَحَرَّى الصِّدْقَ حَتَّى يُكْتَبَ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ صِدِّيقًا. And a man keeps on speaking the truth and pursuing the truth until he is written with Allah as a Siddiq, truthful person. وَإِيَّاكُمْ وَالْكَذِبَ فَإِنَّ الْكَذِبَ يَهْدِي إِلَى الْفُجُورِ وَإِنَّ الْفُجُورَ يَهْدِي إِلَى النَّارِ وَمَا يَزَالُ الرَّجُلُ يَكْذِبُ وَيَتَحَرَّى الْكَذِبَ حَتَّى يُكْتَبَ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ كَذَّابًا. And beware of lying, because lying leads to evil doing, and fujur, or doing evil, leads to the fire. And a man will keep on lying and pursuing lies until he is written with Allah as a liar. This hadith is a premier hadith for encouraging people to speak the truth, even if it is painful. And we do not find a greater example than the story of Ka'b ibn Malik when he remained behind and did not join the Battle of Tabuk. When the Prophet asked him, he did not lie and offer feeble excuses. He simply spoke the truth. He simply owned up that he was lazy, and he let his laziness get the better of him. As for the other munafiqeen, they came out with all of these lies and false excuses. And yes, indeed, it was hard for Ka'b, as the Muslims were ordered by the Prophet to abandon Ka'b for what totaled to 50 days. But in the end, the final good end was with Ka'b, when the Prophet revealed that Allah Jalla wa Ala has accepted his tawbah. So after some sadness and depression, there came the relief and happiness. And this was as a result of his truthfulness. Otherwise, he could have just done as the munafiqeen did and offer up excuses and hide behind them, and all would have been good and well. But that is not best for the final outcome. Lying, kadhib, normally we understand this to be when you say something not in accordance with the truth, and so this is lying with the tongue. But lying can also be with the limbs, physical action, and this would be what the munafiqun would do. They would perform actions not in accordance with what they internally believe. So you would find the munafiqun praying with the Muslimin, for example, but this is not what they believe inside. They do not believe that this prayer has any benefit, or it ought to be prayed, or that it is obligatory. They are just doing it for show, of course. We are taught that sidq, truthfulness, leads to birr, that is to be translated as righteousness. Birr is much goodness. One of the names of Allah Jalla wa Ala is Al-Barr, ay kathirul khairat, the one who does good much. Not just the one who simply does good, anyone can do that, but the one who does good much and much and much. And a man continues to speak the truth and pursue the truth until he is written with Allah as a Siddiq. A Siddiq, this status is one just below the status of being a prophet. It is the best type of mu'min you can be without being a prophet. Women can also become a Siddiq, as in مَا الْمَسِيحُ بْنُ مَرْيَمَ إِلَّا رَسُولٌ قَدْ خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبْلِهِ الرُّسُلُ وَأُمُّهُ صِدِّيقَةٌ كَانَ يَأْكُلَانِ الطَّعَامَ. So the mother of Isa alayhi salam is called a Siddiqa, a truthful woman, and one who pursues the truth in her speech, in her beliefs, and in her actions. And the man from this ummah known as As-Siddiq is Abu Bakr, whose name is Abdullah ibn Uthman ibn Abi Quhafa. He was one of the earliest of those who answered the call of the Prophet and did not hesitate one bit. Many people believed in the Prophet, however, belief is not the same. Abu Bakr believed in the Prophet when the vast majority of the people disbelieved in him. And this is what makes his belief stand out from the rest. To believe during a hard time, or when the odds are stacked against you, when you're against a whole nation, is much more difficult than to believe when everyone else is believing. So to go right against the tide of the society, like going against a tidal wave, how difficult must that be? That sort of belief is worth so much more than any other type of belief. And it is quite fitting then that Abu Bakr as-Siddiq should be titled as-Siddiq. And also, when the Prophet told the people about the night journey, and everyone mocked him and belied him. How can you make such a ridiculous claim that you went from here to the Bayt al-Maqdis, and then from there you went up to some different dimension up in the heavens where you saw all of these different prophets and you spoke to Allah? Now that would be outrageous enough, but all of that in just one night? You expect us to believe that? The tidal wave was against him, but Abu Bakr as-Siddiq still believed the Prophet. The mushrikun went to Abu Bakr and told him, hey, look what your companion is saying. Look at these outrageous claims he's making. And Abu Bakr simply replied that if he had said it, then it is the truth. And from that day he was given the title as-Siddiq. As for kadhib, lying, then it leads to fujur, and this is simply disobedience. The worst type of this is kufr itself. And all the kuffar are fujjar. As in, كَلَّا إِنَّ كِتَابَ الْفُجَّارِ لَفِي سِجِّينَ. The records of the fujjar are in the sijjeen, a lowly place. So the fujjar here are the kuffar. And nowadays we find from lying, which people take lightly, is lying in order to make people laugh. And the Prophet ﷺ said, وَيْلٌ لِمَنْ حَدَّثَ فَكَذَبَ لِيُضْحِكَ بِهِ الْقَوْمِ وَيْلٌ لَهُ ثُمَّ وَيْلٌ لَهُ. Destruction be upon the one who speaks and lies so that he could make the people laugh. Destruction be upon him, and then destruction be upon him. So lying is without a doubt a sin. Are there any exceptions to it? Well, previously we mentioned exceptions. Only some scholars say that even with the exceptions you're not allowed to plainly lie, as in an outright lie. Rather, you must equivocate. And they say that equivocation can be called a kadhib, a lie. They use the hadith which says that Ibrahim lied 3 times. So the word kadhabat, lies, are used. Twice in relation to Allah, when he said, Inni saqim, I am ill, and also bal fa'alahu kabiruhum hadha. Nay, the biggest statue or idol amongst them broke the other idols. And one time with regards to Sarah, when he said to her, tell the king that you are my sister. These are equivocations that Ibrahim made, but they are called lies. So this is the opinion of some scholars. They say that even with the exceptions, as in the previous hadith, لَيْسَ الْكَذَّابَ الَّذِي يُصْلِحُ بَيْنَ النَّاسِ وَيَقُولُ خَيْرًا وَيَنْمِي خَيْرًا. They say even if you have to lie, it must be an equivocation, not a clear-cut out lie. Well, in practical terms, we say at the very least, it is better for you that if you are going to lie in a particular situation which permits that, then it should be an equivocation. But for us to obligate the equivocation, then we are hesitant to do so. We take from the hadith that speaking the truth always is wajib, because it is the means by which you will enter Jannah. And to undertake the means that will enter you into Jannah is of course wajib. Also take note that the hadith talks about seeking or pursuing the truth. So the truthful person is always seeking or pursuing the truth. Whenever he speaks, he must ensure that it is the truth he's speaking, and that what he is saying is verified, not just going on hearsay. We take from the hadith that the Sharia encourages the best type of character. We also learn that righteous actions lead to more righteous actions. And the same thing with evil actions. It leads to yet more evil. So evil begets evil, and righteousness begets righteousness. Because when you are used to righteous actions, it becomes like second nature to you. But unfortunately, so is the case with evil actions. So you have to choose which slippery slope you will slide down. The one of righteousness, where you increase in righteousness, or the one of evil, where you increase in evil. We also learn that to reach Jannah, you need righteous actions, though you will not enter Jannah in exchange for your righteous actions. So note the difference. You will enter Jannah because of your righteous actions, but not in exchange for your righteous actions. We can also take that as long as a person tries to pursue the truth, and if he does get it wrong now and then he's not sinful because he pursued the truth, but he so happened to get it wrong. And this is a general case with pretty much everything. For example, in divorce, a man issues a divorce to his wife because he thinks she has spoken to a non-mahram man. And so he issues the divorce based on that. But then it turns out that this man was not a non-mahram, rather he was a mahram to his wife. So the question is, does the divorce count? The answer, no, it does not. Also, if he takes an oath, let's say, based on what is predominant in his thoughts. For example, he says, Wallahi, my friend Zayd will arrive tomorrow. And Zayd does not arrive tomorrow. But he took that oath because Zayd informed him that he will be arriving tomorrow. He had his flight details, and it said that he will be arriving tomorrow. So all the knowledge which he had pointed to the fact that Zayd will arrive tomorrow, but he did not. Maybe he was delayed or whatever other reason. The point is he sinful in this oath? Does he have a kafara on him? The answer is no, because he did not intend to lie and speak a non-truth. What about if a man says to his wife, if you speak to Zayd, you are divorced? And let us suppose he sees her speaking to someone, he thinks it is Zayd, and upon that he issues the divorce. But it turns out that the man she was speaking to was not Zayd. So the question, does the divorce count? The answer is no. So the point is, every time a person speaks, thinking he is true, having pursued the truth, then even if he happens to be wrong, there is no sin or blame against him. And that includes no kafara against him as well, if it's an oath. Let's take the next chapter about the virtue of the one who can control himself at the time of anger. From Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, the Prophet asked the companions, مَا تَعُدُّونَ الرَّقُوبَ فِيكُمْ? Whom do you consider to be the raqub amongst you? They said, الَّذِي لَا يُولَدُ لَهُ, the one who has no children born to him. The Prophet replied, لَيْسَ ذَاكَ بِالرَّقُوبِ وَلَكِنَّهُ الرَّجُلُ الَّذِي لَمْ يُقَدِّمْ مِنْ وَلَدِهِ شَيْئًا. That is not the raqub, but rather the raqub is the man who is not rewarded due to the lack of his patience at the death of his children. Then the Prophet asked, فَمَا تَعُدُّونَ السُّرْعَةَ فِيكُمْ? Whom do you consider to be the wrestler amongst you? They said, الَّذِي لَا يَصْرَعُهُ الرِّجَالِ, the one whom other men cannot wrestle him down to the ground. And the Prophet said, لَيْسَ بِذَلِكَ وَلَكِنَّهُ الَّذِي يَمْلِكُ نَفْسَهُ عِنْدَ الْغَضَبِ. That is not the sur'ah, but rather the real wrestler is the one who controls himself at the time of anger. In both of these questions, the Sahaba replied correctly, because the raqub is the one who does not have any surviving children. That is to say, his children have died. And they replied by saying, the one who has no children born to him. It comes from raqaba yarqubu, which means to observe, because this person observes his child's death. Linguistically, they knew what ar-raqub means. Likewise with the word as-sur'ah, it means the wrestler who wrestles everyone, so he's like the top wrestler. No one can beat him. Both of these answers from the Sahaba were correct. However, the Prophet wants to turn their attention to the Shar'i sense and to think along the Sharia lines, not along the linguistic lines. And so the raqub, the Prophet informs them that it is the one whose children may have died, but he did not keep patient, and so he will not find the reward of his loss in the akhirah. This is the real raqub, not the one who has merely lost his children. So the point is, if your children die, keep patient, and you will find the reward because of your children in the hereafter. So do not let the loss of your children be in vain. Then the second part was about the wrestler. Strength is of two types. Outer strength, this is your physical strength, depending on your muscles, and also the inner strength, the spiritual one. And that is what the Prophet wants the Sahaba to focus on, not the outer strength, but the inner strength. To control yourself at the time of anger, this requires inner strength. Also in the chapter, the Prophet found a man to be very angry, and he says, I know something which if he says it, his anger will go away. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. And this message was conveyed to the angry man, and he said, أَمَجْنُونًا تَرَانِي? Do you see me as mad? So this man in his anger refused to even utter these noble words. So the message is that if you are angry, this is from shaitan, he is inciting your anger. So say, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. You can also make wudu, this is a good idea. And also leave the place in which you are angry, so change your environment or scenery. Let's take the next chapter about the nature of man not being able to control himself. From Anas, the Prophet says, لما صور الله آدم في الجنة تركه ما شاء الله أن يتركه فجعل إبليس يطيف به ينظر ما هو فلما رآه أجوف عرف أنه خلق خلقا لا يتمالك. When Allah shaped Adam in Jannah, He left Adam alone, that is, as a statue form, for however long He wanted to leave him. And Shaitan circumambulated around this sculpture of Adam, and when he saw that this sculpture was hollow within, the Shaitan concluded that this Adam would have such a disposition that he would not be able to control his self. So this hadith informs us that Shaitan arrived at the conclusion that Adam will be such a person who will not be able to control himself from desires and so on. Was the Shaitan correct? The answer is, of course he was. Adam himself ate from the tree, and his progeny likewise are not able to control themselves under desires. And he made this conclusion by looking at the physical nature of Adam, hollow from the inside, so physically hollow, and he concluded that he must also therefore be spiritually hollow. This hadith also is a refutation of Darwin's evolution theory, which teaches us that man evolved from primordial slime into a single-celled amoeba, into some sort of fish, into some sort of ape, and into the human format, all of this across millions of years. And that is all kufr and nonsense. There is no way that that theory can be reconciled with the text of the Quran and the Sunnah. Especially it cannot be reconciled with this hadith, which teaches us that Adam was sculpted into a human form, and so he was like a statue left in Jannah for a time. There is no mention of a transformation from a single-celled amoeba to a fish to an ape and so on. Rather, Adam was created and fashioned as a fully grown man. And also, evolution theory tells us that man has got larger, so from an amoeba to a fish to an ape, to a human he has gotten taller. But the text teaches us that Adam a.s. was 60 cubits tall. No human in the world today is 60 cubits tall, so humans have been getting shorter. So it's going the opposite direction of the evolution theory. In a case like this, we say we have believed in what Allah Jalla wa Ala has told us, and we have disbelieved in the theory proposed by all the scientists of the world. In order to be a Muslim, you must be first a kafir. And so the Muslim is a kafir in the evolution theory, as the evolution theory is a taghut. وَمَنْ يَكْفُرْ بِالطَّاغُوتِ وَيُؤْمِنْ بِاللَّهِ فَقَدْ اسْتَمْسَكَ بِالْعُرْوَةِ الْوُثْقَى لَا انْفِصَامَ لَهَا وَاللَّهُ سَمِيعٌ عَلِيمٌ. You have to make kufr in taghut first, before you can even entertain the idea of being a Muslim. The next chapter of not striking the face. From Abu Hurairah, the Prophet says, إِذَا قَاتَلَ أَحَدُكُمْ أَخَاهُ فَلْيَجْتَنِبِ الْوَجْهِ. When one of you fights his brother, then let him avoid the face. فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ خَلَقَ آدَمَ عَلَى صُورَتِهِ. For Allah has created Adam on his image. So here we learn the order to avoid hitting the face. If you have to punish someone, by all means punish them if they are deserving it, but you must not strike the face. So you can hit the back, let's say, or the backside, the arms perhaps, somewhere where you're not going to cause any long-term injury or bruising or bleeding. And upon this then, boxing as a sport is impermissible, because you're exactly punching the face. The reason for this is that Allah created Adam on his image, the image of Allah Jalla wa Ala. Now that does not mean that Adam looks like Allah. Just because you're on the image of someone does not mean you look like him. Just like, for example, the Prophet said, أول زمرة يدخلون الجنة على صورة القمر ليلة البدر. The first group of people to enter Jannah will be upon the image of the full moon. That does not mean that these people will look like the full moon. There is clear difference between a human being and a moon. But it does mean to say that there are some similarities from certain angles. For example, in terms of the brightness and brilliance of the full moon and the brightness and brilliance of the people entering Jannah. So to honor this image, you do not hit the face. Also, there is an issue about the word qatala in the hadith, when one of you fights his brother. But is fighting your brother not haram? As in the hadith, sibabul muslim fusuq wa qitaluhu kufr. So the Prophet calls it kufr, because it's from the traits of the kuffar. And the way to solve it is to look at the reason for this hadith. This hadith was uttered by the Prophet in response to somebody
striking the face of his servant to discipline him. And so if you're striking your servant to discipline him, or your children for that matter, then do not strike the face. However, if somebody strikes your face without due right, then you are permitted to strike his face by way of qisas. But when you're disciplining somebody else under your authority, then you do not strike the face.
The next chapter about warning those people who punish others without due right.
Hisham ibn Hakim radiallahu an
happened to pass by some farmers in Syria who were made to stand in the sun, and olive oil was being poured over their heads. He asked, "What is this all about?" And he was told they are being punished for not paying the kharaj, the land tax. To which he says, "I heard the Prophet say, Inna Allaha yu'adhibu alladhina yu'adhibuna fid dunya." Allah will punish those who torment other people in this world. And in another narration, he ordered that they be let off. Now this hadith needs to be understood in the proper context, that you punish people without due right. As for punishing people with due right, then this is obligatory. It is, for example, obligatory to cut the hand of the thief on whom the evidence has been established. And the Prophet ﷺ himself said, "Man la yarham la yurham." The one who has no mercy will be shown no mercy. By Allah Jalla wa'ala, of course.
We may take from the narration that you're not allowed to punish any dhimmi who is unable to pay the jizya or the kharaj. Also note how Hisham ibn Hakim spoke truth to power. He advised the ruler not to be punishing these people. And this is complementary evidence to when the Prophet was asked what is the most virtuous type of jihad, and the Prophet replied, Kalimatul haqq inda sultanin ja'ir, a word of truth to the unjust ruler. So that is not to criticize the ruler himself, but rather the actions which the ruler is perpetrating.
The next chapter about covering your weapons in a crowded place. Jabir ibn Abdullah reports that a man came to the masjid holding an arrow, and the Prophet ordered him, Amsik bin Saliha, take hold of the arrowhead. And the reason for this order, to take hold of the arrowhead, should be clear, because if you do not take hold of the arrowhead and you're walking about with this amongst the people, it will cause them disturbance, because they will feel afraid that you might injure them.
In this, there is evidence that you can carry a weapon inside the masjid, because the Prophet did not order that the weapons be taken out. It's just that the arrowhead be covered. So if you're carrying a gun, it should be concealed, so as not to frighten others.
The hadith talks about a masjid, however, we can talk about any crowded place, like a market and so on, because the illah, the justification, is one and the same, that you are annoying or harming the mu'mineen. And Allah Jalla wa'ala says, وَالَّذِينَ يُؤْذُونَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ بِغَيْرِ مَا اكْتَسَبُوا فَقَدْ احْتَمَلُوا بُهْتَانًا وَإِثْمًا مُبِينًا. Those who annoy the male and female mu'mineen without due right, that is through no fault of their own, then such transgressors have committed a great slander and a plain sin. The next chapter about pointing a weapon to your fellow Muslim. From Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, من أشار إلى أخيه بحديدة فإن الملائكة تلعنه حتى وإن كان أخاه لأبيه وأمه. Whoever points a sharp metal object to his brother, then the angels curse him, even if that person was his brother from the father and the mother. Also in the chapter from Abu Hurairah that the Prophet said, لا يشير أحدكم إلى أخيه بالسلاح فإنه لا يدري أحدكم لعل الشيطان ينزع في يده فيقع في حفرة من النار. One of you should not point his weapon at his brother, because one of you does not know, perhaps Shaitan will make it slip from his hand, thus he will fall into a pit of the fire. So both of these narrations about pointing a weapon to your brother. Now this could be in earnest or in jest. They are both forbidden. It doesn't have to be pointing a weapon as such. It could be, let's say, pretending to throw a stone at someone, because the illah is the same. It could also be pretending to run somebody over with your car by driving it fast towards him. So doing these things is haram, because maybe that shaitan entices you to actually go ahead with it. And if you manage to injure your brother, then you will land in a pit of the fire. And so this hadith, just like the last one, is encouraging praiseworthy adab, etiquettes. And just take note here, a particularly important note, that this hadith also refers to when you point a weapon in a joking fashion, because that's most often the case, people pointing weapons whilst joking with each other, or pretending to run people over, or pretending to throw a stone at someone, and so on. The next chapter about removing harmful objects from the road or path. From Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, بينما رجل يمشي بطريق وجد غصن شوك على الطريق فأخره فشكر الله له فغفر له. Whilst the man was walking along a path, he found a thorny branch. He pushed it to the side, and Allah was grateful for his action and granted him pardon. So this narration teaches us that your sins can be forgiven even for removing a harmful object like a thorny branch from the road. And even things like a banana peel or a stone or anything that could cause annoyance and harm, you remove it from the pathway if it is in your power to do so, and that this will be a charity for you. So again, praiseworthy etiquettes. These etiquettes are naturally beloved to a human being. It is part of its fitrah, but Islam comes and incentivizes these natural good qualities. As in Islam, no good deed should go unnoticed and unrewarded. Even if it is a non-Muslim's good deeds, who will be rewarded in this life. Let's move to the next chapter about tormenting a cat. This hadith has preceded, but it is here again. Abdullah reports that the Prophet said, عُذِّبَتْ إِمْرَأَةٌ فِي هِرَّةٍ سَجَنَتْهَا حَتَّى مَاتَتْ فَدَخْلَتْ فِيهَا النَّارِ لَا هِيَ أَطْعَمَتْهَا وَسَقَتْهَا إِذْ هِيَ حَبَسَتْهَا وَلَا هِيَ تَرَكَتْهَا تَأْكُلُ مِنْ خَشَاشِ الْأَرْضِ. A woman was punished because of a cat which she had imprisoned until the cat died, and so the woman entered the fire on account of the cat. She did not feed the cat, nor give it to drink, nor let the cat out, so that it may catch the creatures of the land. We learn from this narration that tormenting animals, not just a cat but any animal, is haram, if it is without any due right. And likewise in the good treatment of any animal, there is a reward, as we found about the hadith of the prostitute giving the dog to drink. فِي كُلِّ كَبِدٍ رَطْبٍ أَجْرٍ. In every moist liver there is a reward, be it an animal, be it a human. The next chapter about pride. From Abu Hurairah that the Prophet said, الْعِزُّ إِزَارُهُ وَالْكِبْرِيَاءُ رِدَاؤُهُ فَمَنْ يُنَازِعُنِي عَذَّبْتُهُ. Al-Izz, or honor and might, is his izar, meaning the izar of Allah. And pride is his rida. Whoever contends with Allah about any of these two matters, then Allah will punish him. So from this it becomes known that it is haram to feel high and mighty in the land and to feel proud. Only Allah Jalla wa Ala can be proud with due right. As for humans, they need to be humble. وَلَا تَمْشِ فِي الْأَرْضِ مَرَحًا إِنَّكَ لَن تَخْرِقَ الْأَرْضَ وَلَن تَبْلُغَ الْجِبَالَ طُولًا. Do not walk on the earth with pride and vanity. You cannot pass through the earth, and neither can you reach the mountains in height. So you are small compared to the nature, compared to earth and the mountains. So you need to act with humility. Notice the hadith talks about the izar and rida. It cannot be understood that Allah wears clothing. That would be ridiculous. Rather, the clothing here in the context mean His description or attribute. Just as your clothing are your adornment, so al-izz and kibriya are the adornment of Allah Jalla wa Ala. No one else is allowed to have this adornment. The next chapter about feeling hopeless of the mercy of Allah. Jundub reports that the Prophet said, أن رجلا قال والله لا يغفر الله لفلان. A man said, by Allah, Allah will not forgive such and such a person. To which Allah replied, من ذا الذي يتألى علي ألا أغفر لفلان فإني قد غفرت لفلان وأحبطت عملك. Who is taking an oath against me that I will not forgive Fulan? For verily I have forgiven him, and I have made your deeds go to waste. So in this narration, one person says to the other that Allah will never forgive you, because this person who is uttering these words, he is a worshipper and he is pleased with his actions. The other one is a sinner, and so the first advises him, do not commit these sins that you're doing. But the sinner does not listen, tells him to go away or leave me alone. And this annoys the first person, and he says, Wallahi, Allah will not forgive you. And these are grave words indeed, because there is not a sin in the world that Allah Jalla wa Ala cannot forgive. He uttered these words being pleased with his own self because of his acts of ibadah and so on, and belittling his sinful brother. So just look at how dramatically the tables are turned. It is permissible to take an oath against Allah in a matter which is permissible, or there is no transgression against another person, as in the hadith coming up. But in this particular case, he was transgressing against the other person. It's as if he wanted Allah not to forgive that other person. And that is not loving for your brother what you love for yourself. The hadith teaches us that no matter how much of a sinner a person may be, Allah Jalla wa Ala can always forgive his sins. The next chapter, about the virtue of the weak and the downtrodden. From Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, رُبَّ أَشْعَثَ مَدْفُوعٍ بِالْأَبْوَابِ لَوْ أَقْسَمَ عَلَى اللَّهِ لَأَبَرَّهُ. How many people with disheveled hair who are turned away from the door, if he were to take an oath against Allah, then Allah would fulfill it for him. This hadith is talking about a poor man with disheveled hair, somebody lowly in status. مَدْفُوعٍ بِالْأَبْوَابِ. He's pushed away from the door. So if he comes to seek help, he is so lowly, people do not even pay him any attention. They just push him away from their door. They will not even allow him in to sit in their gathering. However, such a person may have value and esteem in the eyes of Allah Jalla wa Ala, such that if he takes an oath against Allah, then Allah will fulfill it for him. So for example, he may say, Wallahi, such and such an event will not happen. So Allah will make it that such and such an event will not happen. He will fulfill his oath. Or perhaps he says, Wallahi, XYZ will happen. And so Allah will make XYZ come to pass. And the reason why Allah fulfills his oath is because of the honor which this man has with Allah. We have an example in the story of Rabi' bint al-Nadhr, who broke another woman's teeth. And the qisas is that her teeth are to be broken. And so her brother Anas ibn al-Nadhr said, will the teeth of Rabi' be broken? Wallahi, her teeth will not be broken. But the Prophet said, Kitabullahi al-Qisas. The book of Allah, or the ordainment of Allah, is al-Qisas. Tooth for a tooth. So what happened is that the people who had the right of Qisas, they forgave her. They forgave Rabi'. And so this is where the Prophet said, Inna min ibadillahi man law aqsama ala Allahi la'abarra. From the servants of Allah, those, when they take an oath on Allah, He fulfills it for them. Because Anas ibn al-Nadhr took an oath on Allah that her teeth will not be broken. And Allah Jalla wa Ala made it come to pass that her teeth were not broken. Anas ibn al-Nadhr had husnul dhan of Allah. He thought well of Allah Jalla wa Ala, that Allah will deliver Rabi' from the punishment. As for in this hadith, the man who took an oath against Allah did so out of pride, being pleased with his own self and looking down upon others. So Allah Jalla wa Ala will not fulfill such an oath. So the message from this hadith, never say that Allah will never forgive such and such a person, no matter how much of a sinner he is. Because if you said that, then you would be treading in an area you have no right to tread. Let's take a look at the next chapter, about saying that the people are destroyed. From Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, إِذَا قَالَ الرَّجُلُ هَلَكَ النَّاسِ فَهُوَ أَهْلَكُهُمْ. If a man says, the people are destroyed, then he is the one who is most destroyed from them. This man is uttering these words, looking down upon the people. So from that angle, this hadith is similar to the one previous, where the man said, Wallahi, Allah will not forgive such and such a person, looking down on that person. And here in this hadith, this man is looking down on the others. He says, the people are destroyed, and also being pride and arrogant, and seeing himself as above others. However, this hadith does not mean that it is impermissible to complain about the situation of the people, if that complaint is warranted. For example, the statement of Abu Darda, after the death of the Prophet, he said about the state of his people, by Allah, I do not know anything of the ummah of Muhammad ﷺ, except that they pray in jama'ah together. So he's lamenting the state of affairs, that the only goodness that he sees is that they pray in jama'ah together. That is to say, they are far off, removed from how the companions used to be with the Prophet. So lamenting with due right is permissible. And also it can be that if a person keeps complaining about the conditions of the people, it could lead him to thinking highly of himself and better than others. The next chapter, about the good treatment of the neighbor. From Aisha that the Prophet said, ما زال جبريل يوصيني بالجار حتى ظننت أنه ليورثنه. Jibreel kept ordering me to treat the neighbor well, until so much so I thought that he was going to make my neighbor inherit from me. First of all, who is your neighbor? Your neighbor is the one who lives in your neighborhood. What is your neighborhood? Well, this is defined by the customs. But the closer your neighbor is, the more rights he has over you. Jibreel ﷺ himself does not have the right to legislate in the Sharia, but what the hadith means is that Jibreel will come with a revelation saying that your neighbor will inherit from you. We find from the narration it is haram to annoy the neighbor. Many people play loud music or speak loudly, cause noise pollution, and many other annoyances besides. All of this may not seem like a big deal, but it is haram. The Prophet ﷺ taught us, Man yu'minu billahi wal yawm al-akhir falyuhsin ila jarih. Whoever has iman in Allah and the last day, then let him do good to his neighbor. Likewise, he said 3 times, Wallahi la yu'min. By Allah, he does not have iman. They asked who? And the Prophet replied, Man la ya'manu jaruhu bawa'iqa. The one whose neighbor is not safe from his evils or annoyances. Also in the chapter, from Abu Dharr, the Prophet said, Ya Abu Dharr, إذا طبخت مرقة فأكثر ماءها وتعاهد جيرانك. O Abu Dharr, when you cook broth, then put more water in it and pay attention to your neighbor. So when you're making this broth, then put more water so as to make it more plentiful, and also give some to your neighbor. So this is to say, give food and share food with your neighbor. It's a lost sunnah. We do not see it anywhere nowadays. Fallahul musta'an. The next chapter, about meeting people with a cheerful face. From Abu Dharr, the Prophet said, لا تحقرن من المعروف شيئا ولو أن تلقى أخاك بوجه طلق. Do not consider to be insignificant any good action, even if you were to meet your brother with a cheerful face. No good deed is too small in the sight of Allah Jalla wa Ala. Every good deed counts. Not only just counts, but it can make the difference to your scales. Even something as seemingly insignificant as meeting your Muslim brother with a cheerful face. Little acts of kindnesses like giving a pen or maybe a glass of water. Something seemingly insignificant may not be so insignificant in the sight of Allah Jalla wa Ala. In the next chapter, about intercession in permissible matters. Abu Musa al-Ash'ari radiallahu anhu reports that when anybody needing help came to the Prophet commanded his companions saying, Ishfa'u فَلْتُؤْجَرُوا وَلْيَقْضِ اللَّهُ عَلَى لِسَانِ نَبِيِّهِ مَا أَحَبَّ. Intercede for each other, you will be rewarded, and let Allah give the verdict through the tongue of His Prophet, whatever He loves. The Prophet is encouraging here making intercession for each other. You're not allowed to make intercession if a person has a had punishment justified for him. You cannot say, oh, let him off being whipped 100 lashes for zina, for example. No, that is haram. But in other affairs, where there is flexibility, you can make intercession for each other, and you will be rewarded for helping your brother out, because this is ihsan. And let Allah give His decision on the tongue of His Prophet, whatever Allah Jalla wa Ala loves. As the Prophet is going to make a judgment based on the Sharia, whatever happens. But as for you, then yes, you can make shafa'ah or intercession for your brother. In permissible matters, of course. The next chapter about keeping good company. Abu Musa al-Ash'ari again reports that the Prophet said, إنما مثل الجليس الصالح والجليس السوء كحامل المسك ونافخ الكير. The parable of the good company and the bad company is like the one who carries misk, which is a perfume, and the one who blows on the bellows. فحامل المسك إما أن يحذيك وإما أن تبتاع منه وإما أن تجد منه ريحا طيبة. As for the one who carries the perfume, then either he will give you some, or you can buy some from him, or at the very least you will find some good fragrance from him. ونافخ الكير إما أن يحرق ثيابك وإما أن تجد ريحا خبيثة. As for the one who blows the bellows, then either he will burn your clothes, or you will find an offensive smell from him. Misk is a type of perfume which comes from the blood of the gazelle.
And this hadith teaches by way of analogy the importance of having righteous company and to remain aloof of evil and iniquitous company. Okay, let us take some review questions at this stage. So question number 1. What is the ruling on hitting the face when you are disciplining those under your authority? And give the justification. Question number 2. What are the guidelines on carrying weapons in a congregation? And also give the justification. Question number 3. Taking an oath against Allah, that is to say, you take an oath that a certain event will happen, and you intend thereby that Allah will make it come to pass, is of 2 types. Make mention of both types, giving evidence for each.